to the Freak Show, fellow freaks.
I'm Matthew Brockmeyer.
And I'm Krista Carmen.
And this is
Murder Coaster.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are beyond thrilled to have author, journalist, and true crime legend Jillian Lauren with us here today. For over 2 years, Jillian interviewed and developed a rapport with murderer Samuel Little, during which she was able to solve cold homicide cases, as it was revealed that Samuel Little was the most prolific serial killer in American history, with as many as 93 victims, the FBI confirming over 60. For decades, this monster that Jillian bravely confronted roamed the country from coast to coast, seeking out marginalized women and strangling them to death. Most of his crimes never linked together. Jillian turned her experiences into the book, Behold the Monster, Confronting America's Most Prolific Serial Killer, which, seriously, is one of, if not the most well-written, informative, and enthralling true crime books I have ever read. And I've read a lot of them. Just amazing, taking the genre of true crime and elevating it to an absolute art form. Her experiences were also turned into the Starz television series, Confronting a Monster. Jillian, thank you so much for taking the time to come on our show. We are absolutely honored to have you.
Thank you. Me too. And you know, writing in this genre space, it's not often that I even get to discuss the literary piece of true crime. So I very much appreciate you mentioning it. And let's get into all the pieces of true crime. Thank you for having me, you guys.
You did an absolute tremendous job with it, and there's so much to unpack here. You know, the book is long, the true crime documentary. So we're obviously going to treat our listeners to as much of an insight into that as we can, but it can be hard to know where to start. So why don't you begin by telling our listeners just how you ended up corresponding with Samuel Little?
It can be hard to know where to start, and I always have to give myself a primer. But still, to this day, after almost 5 years working on this story, I have to look at my notes before every interview, because 93, I try to sort of, and it's actually 64 confirmed now victims, and so I look at that list and the notes that I have and the dates, and I remind myself exactly what the impact of that is. And I had no idea when I first met Sam what I was getting myself into. In answer to your question, I first met him because I was writing a mystery novel, which has always been a dream of mine. First thing I bought for myself when I got the advance for Behold the Monster is the entire first edition of Nancy Drew.
That's amazing.
I did. It's true. It's right here. And I treasure it. These beautiful old yellow books,
Love it.
And I found in my grandmother's basement. I bought them for myself when I solved a murder. So I have been fascinated with this my whole life. My idea was to write a work of fiction. I had been writing about memoir. I'd been writing about my life for a long time. There are other sensational things that have happened, one of which was being the mistress of the richest man in the world. We're going to have to gloss over that. You guys, we're going to have to go fast, okay? Just
yes, listeners can read your memoir.
Yes, you're going to hear
They're going to have to read it themselves.
You don't believe me?
Some girls, right?
I'm just going to say, do you have any idea how much of a legal vet they give me before they ever publish one word I write. I go over every page with a lawyer for one publisher to stand next to me and say, "You really did these things?" My husband met Cassandra Peterson the other night and gave her the book because, I was like, "Oh my, please give Elvira my book, please." Yes. And she came back and was like, "Your wife really wrote this? Did this?" And I was like, and he was like, "Yes, my wife really did that."
Can you put that on a resume? Like elicited incredulity from Elvira. That's amazing.
Yeah, I'll get to her people right now and say, "Can I say something you said casually to my husband and use it as blurb?" But in any case, it's fairly unbelievable unless it's your life, in which case we're exceptionally adaptable creatures as humans, right? So what happened was I was reading a mystery novel, living in Silver Lake, as mom with 2 kids, really busy, got some great cop friends who started to talk to me, and I got an introduction to Mitzi Roberts. Detective Mitzi Roberts, now retired, and watch for all Michael Connelly fans. She is the prototype of Renee Ballard, who is a fictional character. Mitzi Roberts is a real detective with the LAPD, or was until a few days ago.
Yeah. Oh, wow. She just retired.
Mitzi Roberts, Detective 3, is recently retired. And now I'll really get some dirt. So I'm super excited because retired cops are my favorite. But I got an interview with her and it was about procedural stuff and the Black Dahlia. She was the custodial detective of the Black Dahlia. Any cold case in Los Angeles technically has a detective who is the custodian of the case. No one wants the Black Dahlia because you have to take every tip. Every lunatic calls in. So it's the Black Dahlia. It's like the most famous, unsolvable, won't be solved. Sorry, everyone. Cold case.
Right.
We have
in the
our own
world,
theories,
baby.
but we'll spare you.
I mean, we all have our theories. So does Mitzi, by the way. I'll let her tell you. But we all have our theories, but it's not going to be solved. And also, why should it be prioritized? We're going to talk about cold cases and what my book's really about. Why do people prioritize this famous case and like demand it be solved? Happened in 1941 or something, or 27 or 38. I don't know. 41, I think.
After World War II, 1947, I believe, in January.
I think that's right. But in any case, it was a piece of this fantastic Los Angeles crimescape we have, which is, one of the only things I like about it here. I love the crime and I love the wildlife. But the crime is just so fascinating and intertwined with like the infrastructure of this city.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. So true.
And so you start with something like Sam, and then you enter a whole world, right? So I was talking to Mitz about Detective Roberts, about these cases she's worked on, and the guy who thought he was Haile Selassie and she found his son's head in a freezer in the apartment. It was my favorite conversation of my life, pretty much. And the Black Dahlia and all the tips she got called in. She took that case because she too is fascinated by cold cases, and that's the one. So just to kind of hold it, she took it. And even though it means that you have to deal with kooks and tips and, and only one person, no, 2 people, she and her lieutenant, only 2 people have the keys to the original Dahlia filing cabinet.
Very cool.
The case to get those keys. I think, her insatiable curiosity and drive drives my story as well. So it's not all that wild that we leapt from this famous old LA cold case to a serial killer. I asked, what is the case you're the most proud of? And she said, I am proud of them all, but I did catch this serial killer once, and that was pretty cool. And we were down at the end of our iced tea, and I was like, oh my gosh, what? I buried the lead. And she said, this is very Detective Roberts. And once again, watch for the show about her. It's called, I think it's untitled, but it's about a detective named Renee Ballard.
Okay.
He would say exactly like Mitzi, I'm not the one, and I'm not the one asking the questions. And I was like, well, please tell me about this serial killer. And she told me about a serial killer I'd never heard of, which surprised me because I'm rather obsessed with true crime and have been since I was 9, just criminology in general, and the ways that brains work differently. I'm really fascinated with neuroscience. So she told me, that they popped this guy, Sam Little, for 3 murders that they had connected through DNA hits due to our new technology available to us and the way that it's being mandated across the country. LA was one of the cities in the initial run of CODIS, which is the DNA data bank that when we all hear like, oh, they connected this guy with this crime, now we're also talking about like familial DNA, and that's different. But if it's because he did another crime, so his DNA is in the system, they'll be connecting it through CODIS. So the LAPD, the cold case special section, which is also called the cold case homicide unit at different times, we're a very Don Quixote bunch of passionate detectives who got, put in a closet somewhere and said, fine, go through these million cold case files. And they started running DNA evidence, and they, there were prostitutes, women of color, addicts, vulnerable people turning up in dumpsters every single morning in Los Angeles, in South LA, within a 20-block radius in the 80s, every day. It was Mad Max. It was the first place in this country that paramilitary tactics were used in an urban center. Like LA invented the SWAT team, and it was flooded with crack, and really unreasonable sentences for young Black men. And here were all these women left with their asses hanging out on Figueroa Street. And it was like a predator's playground. So here's a serial killer I never heard of. He's not the Grim Sleeper. He's not Lonnie Franklin. He's not, Michael Hughes. He's not Richard Ramirez. He's not Lonnie Franklin is the Grim Sleeper. Not Chester Turner. I can laugh about this, but like I said, I was up till 4 a.m, and I'm not laughing about this in a larger sense. It's more the how huge of a story it is, how ignored, how these names are household names. And here comes Sam Little, and I've never even heard of him. And she told me that she suspected him of many more murders across the country. So I shelved everything I was doing, and mark my words, you all, I still will write that mystery. It was good. I think it was good. I think I had a good idea. And I had a good red herring.
I love it. We better read it. We want to read it. We'll have you back on.
Yeah. Stay tuned. But first, check out Behold the Monster. It just came out in paperback a couple of weeks ago. And seriously, I couldn't be more proud of this book, because as wildly as I fell into it, I did fall into it thinking, okay, if there's this serial killer that somehow no one knows or is paying attention to, because if I don't know him,
right.
even the cops who got him felt slighted. Like, unless you have 5 murders, then, they don't care. You don't
He
get
had
the
no
credit.
moniker either, which is interesting. He wasn't.
Yes, but he did, though.
Oh, what is it? What was it?
You want all the secrets?
Oh,
You
well,
want
all
all
the
the
secrets.
secrets?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, I mean, the things that cops call people, like when they're talking about a case, and the different things they're referred to are not always the things that will like get transmitted to the public, which is usually the press. And don't think I didn't try to come up with something better than this, but they called him the choke and stroke killer.
Oh, that's right. I remember you saying that in the book now.
I might
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
mentioned it. Yeah. And also in Florida, they were calling him the Sandman. That
Ooh, that's creepy.
Metallica song Sandman had just come out and it was a huge hit.
Mm-hmm.
And Rick Jackson, Detective Rick Jackson, legendary, also has a whole series, the Harry Bosch series based on him. And Mitzi Roberts were working the case together. They were driving through Florida, listening to someone had given them a CD of Metallica. What was it?
The Black Album.
Black Album. And they were saying, this is your guy. Like he knocks people out. He's the Sandman. And I don't think it's always true, actually, that he knocked people out. I think he knocked people out when they fought. But yeah, so those were 2 monikers that didn't stick. And he's just Sam or Mr. Sam.
Mr. Sam.
Mr. Sam to me and to his babies, or Sam Little, Sam.
Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about his early life and childhood? So dark.
Samuel Little, this to me is a fascinating detail. Is from Reynolds, Georgia. He was born in 1940. His family, during the Great Migration, which is when a lot of Black people in the South moved to, the northern part of the country, or out to Los Angeles here, where there was a great aerospace industry at the time, because they didn't have the same economic opportunities. So his family moved to Lorain, Ohio. So he was raised in Lorain, Ohio. And now the thing I think is interesting is that also from Reynolds, Georgia, a tiny town, was his second cousin, Samuel Little's second cousin, Malcolm X. Earl Little Sr. is Malcolm X's father, was related to Sam's grandmother, Josephine.
So crazy the way these 2 men are so different. You have one that cares about humanity.
I met his niece. His niece blew me right out of the room. Like, they're all, yeah. I asked him, I said, how do you feel about your cousin? I mean, and I always would frame things with him like, well, I mean, you're the best at what you do, right? You really are the best.
You
and
spoke Sam, you say, I think is what you said.
You really are going to die. You're 78 years old, missing half an ass foot, diabetic old man in prison. You're really going to die and let people think your cousin was the one who did something important.
Wow.
And you know what he said? I think he died for what he believed in. I was like, what do you think about that? And he said, I think it's stupid. And
man.
Yeah. I said,
Wow.
Well, is there anything that you would die for, that you believe in? And he was like, no, and it was he didn't even know it was the Rodney King uprising, but the LA riots, he murdered someone during the riots because there were so many Black bodies on the streets.
That section in the book, you would go into his head.
He left her in the middle of a field. Like, he didn't even bother to turn around. It was just like, a sky full of smoke and sirens everywhere. And he used that, like this incredible rift in this historical community.
He exploited it.
Him was just an opportunity.
Yeah.
And to understand psychopathy and sociopathy, so because I know that this is part of what you're interested in, like, what makes a Sam, right? You're asking me, what's his early life like? I mean, I could go back and say, he had an uncle who molested him. There you go. There's one. Childhood abuse, sexual abuse. That gene is there to begin with. The warrior gene, a gene toward addiction. Then he wound up in boys' reformatory school at age 13, is famously abusive. I have like home published book by someone who was like the historian there that has, pictures of paddles they used on the boys. And I mean, the book frames it like it was just a different time when, people really did something about a lack of discipline, and they made them hold these steel balls that were chained to their ankles if they did something wrong, and then the older boys would come and like shove their head against a wall, so they'd drop the ball, and then they'd have another 20 minutes holding the ball. Now there you go. Now you have traumatic brain injury to the frontal lobe. Okay, right. So move on. He was 25 years old before he was ever out of jail for any significant period of time, and I mean, by then, all he wanted to be was a pimp. And he hadn't, he was still trying to like figure out why he wasn't interested in women, in the same way that the guys in prison talked about women, until he started to look at True Detective magazines, right? Which now is often with the serial killers, it's violent pornography. If you talk to Ted Bundy, it's, and sometimes it's blamed, or sometimes, serial killers will say like, well, it just set something off in me. And that's what Sam said. Like, I realized that strangulation was, my point in life, that it was, kind of his mission from God, or certainly his dispensation from God, because he didn't make himself that way. He was made that way. God makes us the way we are, and therefore it was okay. And also, just because he wanted to strangle women, he didn't even do it right away. That's also, another common piece, like an escalation. Behaviors that you notice early that were also ignored. So a woman reported him for rape. That was like probably his first violent violent conviction against a woman. And, but she was a prostitute. And no one even looked at it. I mean, they looked at it for a second and saw that, like, she said he had come in the house a different way than the footprints were in the snow. And they were like, whatever, you're a whore. And that happened again and again and again. Like, he was mostly arrested for shoplifting almost every other day all across the country. And at night, he was killing women. But they caught him when he stole a steak from the Walmart. So they had him pegged as a petty criminal. And, he would say that he spent all that time in prison as a young man, like learning how to work the system. So, I mean, like I said, we could talk all day, but I mean, I think that's a summation of like the early part of his life up until when he really started killing.
Yeah, that I was that part where the guy with no legs being pulled by a goat in a cart
Mr.
finds
Quinn.
the baby. Yeah. It's so Cormac McCarthy. It reminded me of After Darkness.
I think it's true.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say it. I wasn't doubting it.
I had arguments with the Texas Ranger. I had arguments with the
Rag and Bone Man.
Like a rag and bone man. And I had arguments with the Texas Ranger who said, no, his mother was a prostitute and had him in jail. And I said, I have his birth certificate and unless his grandmother delivered him. So unless she was in the jail,
right.
I'm going to go with his. But I mean, that's why,
But she told him this story when he was in his 20s.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, he's heard the story again and again his whole life. He believed it. Just there were other narratives floating around too. So, there were times which I had to make a choice. And I think I make that very clear in the writing, and I point it out whenever it happens. And also, I take other people's points of view. Um, because, and part of that choice, was that a form followed function. The story was so wild um, that I decided to sort of flow with the different narratives and like allow them all in, because really, the last word on the story was Samuel Little. Almost everyone else was dead.
Now he's dead too. You're getting the last word.
Well,
Yeah, I
it's
wanted
not my word though. Like the word's not my word. What I hope to do is introduce a dialogue with these victims.
Mm.
I wanted to be so fascinating. This is true. I wanted this book to be so fascinating, and I did it in a way that like I made it a book I'd want to read.
That's the key, right? You write the book you want.
I try to do that with my other books, but like, I don't know, this one really, I would really read it. And because I wanted people in, like way in, so they would have to meet these women there.
You nailed it. And I wanted to bring up, so you just mentioned, the writing and the taking on the different points of view. And, you say in the beginning that this was your best attempt at the truth with the information that you had. What was it like, Brett? I'm thinking when you described his first kill with Mary and the details and the getting into her headspace, sitting in the bar before he comes in and taking us all the way through that. And then, so it's the part where you say, so he's killed her, he's killed Mary, and he says he's
Just
looking at her.
First victim, 1971.
Yes, and he says she's perfect. She was perfectly his, and you describe how he's experiencing love for the first time, and he all of a sudden understands what the love songs were about. That whole scene, the flip from from being in her head to then being in his head, and like what she had potentially wanted out of the encounter, and then what it turned into. It was like a very, first of all, just incredibly well written, and like the emotional pull, and then the sick, insight into his head. How did you feel after writing a scene like that? And then, obviously we know as writers, you've got to go back in and edit it and make sure it's, you must have gone into her head and then jumped into his head. How many times?
I always say, yeah, as writers, exactly like, they say we never finish anything, we just abandon it. Right. And I say, and then people are like, well, how do you know when to abandon it? I'm like, when you absolutely are going to throw up.
If you read it one more time.
To look at it like I knew everything you ever wanted. My last memoir was done when I couldn't rewrite the chapter about my best friend's suicide one more time. I was like, if I have to do Jen dead one more time, I will vomit all over my expensive computer. So this book is now done. So, in some ways I had to abandon this one more than, there are still 30 victims and I've hardly abandoned them, but I had to abandon my primary voice, which is writing books. That's what I like to do. I like the long game. I like a deep dive. And so in order to get that perspective, Mary's perspective, that was research with the family, research about, historical research about that area, what was going on at the time. And I didn't get every single detail out of Sam's mouth. I found documentation of his mother's boarding house. The streets. I looked at old aerial maps. So it was like kind of, really like just rubber hits the road, old fashioned journalism, reaching out to people's families, reaching out to law enforcement who worked the case. If they weren't around, the detectives now who might be handling cold cases. So it was months and months of research to get one chapter of Mary.
Right.
But how that chapter happened, I cannot answer. At that time, I was waking up at 4 a.m. and using those like just first incredibly quiet hours to write, because the work was so like once the world moved into my head, and there was laundry and school drop-offs and 8,000 emails and, like I just like didn't feel like I could give that space, that creative space, its place. It's kind of, I mean, if you'll forgive me, like what I believe is like a holy place.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you're actually writing, I tell my students, I'm like, really, like, I light a candle when I start, I blow it out when I stop. And like during that time, I tell people, like, in my home, I know I look like I'm here because I'm a writer. My kids think, what did they say the other day? What does my mother do? Oh, she makes up titles of books. When my kid says she answers emails, I'm like, your mother's a best-selling author. How about
Yeah. Let's rewrite that story a little bit, kids.
Oh, come on.
The research is just
but I would tell
amazing.
that those really, yeah. I mean, there was a tremendous amount of research. So it wasn't.
And then you
like,
come at it as a writer, like you're saying, someone with an MFA, someone who's written novels, someone who's written memoirs. I don't think many true crime writers like have that
depth and breadth of experience. It absolutely played into this.
You have so many tools at your disposal to like bring us there.
Not publish my early short stories to save my life.
Well, they wouldn't publish mine either. Don't worry.
I submitted to the New Yorker for years.
We all. They're closed to open submissions now. You can only be invited now.
In those little envelopes. And the New Yorker wouldn't publish me, so I wrote a memoir about the fact that I had sex with Prince. And it's been rolling from there, and I'm like, I'll just draw attention to what you said, Krista, in just your bio, like that people who are like very energized by true crime, by criminality, law now for me, I'm really fascinated. I'm like, oh my gosh, have you seen these tax codes? My husband's like, you are a misery. You're a misery. If I could have, he said to me the other day, like, I thought nothing would be worse than a serial killer. And now I'm interested in like real estate crime. And he's like, and now you're like tax codes. Like, it's worse.
It's worse. Go back to the murders.
I know. I'm like, what do you want me to write, a cookbook? It's not my jam, like it turns out I'm good at this. So like, but we who are adrenalized and like passionate and for me curious and also relentless and have been sort of surprised by people like, I didn't think it would be as hard to generate interest for the victims as it has been. The interview after interview is just like, what was it like? Was it scary? Did he touch you? Did you touch him? What did you say? What did he smell like? What was prison like? And I'm like,
but what about Alice?
I have so much to tell you. I have so much to tell you, and I feel naive. And also, I was fascinated too. So I provide all of that. But, it has been like a soapbox enterprise that for me was a no-brainer. But, that's why I was the one who took it and ran with it and saw the significance of it. And many people have just in solidarity supported the book and my rallying for finding these victims who are still out there. The FBI is still on it. Local jurisdictions are still in it. I talked to a detective in Fort Myers, Florida, just the other day about a case who contacted me because sometimes I have details that that just like slipped into my interviews, not necessarily because, Sam was trying to give me like a little nugget of gold, so I'd have something to come back for. So I had something the cops didn't have. I mean, I think it was also just we were having different conversations than detectives have. So maybe I got a detail like, for instance, Agatha White Buffalo in Omaha, Nebraska. So there were, I mean, people like to say solve, like I solved murders. I wouldn't characterize it like that. I'm not a law enforcement officer, so I can't really solve anything per se. But I was able to cooperate with law enforcement in such a way. And in one case, like I did figure it out from beginning to end with nothing but just, like articles and my conversations with him. And but in the case of Agatha White Buffalo, I called and it was the strangest detail. And it wasn't even an answer to a question about that confession. I asked him, did anyone else know? Who knew? Like none of your girlfriends were driving with you in car after car after car, obsessed with cars and movement, driving and cross country, back and forth. And, so I have a list of so many cars. Like, I mean, I have a list of cars longer than my arm. So he was in his white Thunderbird at that time, and he was driving through Omaha in 1975. And part of how I know years is his cars. And so that was the year of the white Thunderbird. And he said his girlfriend Nina that it had come on the radio that a woman's body had been found. He said behind some smelly old factory, naked, and a bunch of tires, and that his girlfriend had side-eyed him. And he thought in that and changed the channel. And he thought that at that moment, maybe she knew it was him, that maybe she had known all along. And I mean, it doesn't sound like a part of a confession, right? I mean, it sounds like a conversation about his girlfriend, whether she knew or not. But I gave the information to the cops, I gave any of the information about the murders to the cops, and they figured out that Agatha White Buffalo was left naked in a pile of tires behind a tannery.
I thought she was in a barrel.
Oh, in a barrel. I'm sorry. Pile of tires. Yes, she was in a barrel. You see what I mean? I'm like, I do have to go over the list every time.
Jillian, how dare you not remember the details of all 93 confessions?
Well, I did do by memory at the time, because you can't record in a prison. You can't record.
Right.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Not since Manson Carnival, they like shut it all down. And so, any in-person conversation was done from memory, but on the phone, all of it's recorded, of course.
Some chilling conversations you had on the telephone. They just gave me goosebumps.
Yeah. I mean, it was during COVID too that some of this happened. So, as a writer, I have, I'm sort of a super secret double agent, right? I'm like here I am at Gymboree, here I am talking to a serial killer. And so, but we were all at home at the time. And I'm sort of old fashioned, I'll record my conversations on speaker so you can hear them. And so my kids were in the house. My husband was in the house. And I'm just like trying to find hand signals that are like, everyone has to go downstairs. Like, they can't hear this voice. They can't hear this story. They can't, And, it has, I mean, we haven't stopped talking about it since. Like, I'll answer for it forever, but, possibly correctly. Like, why did you put us through that?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. Last week we covered Jason Moss. He wrote that book, The Last Victim. You know what I'm talking about? He wrote to a bunch of serial killers.
Right.
He claims that John Wayne Gacy basically assaulted him and tried to rape him on death row while he was visiting him. And then this week we are covering Jim Beatty. Jim Beatty.
Do you believe him? I'm curious. I haven't listened to that one. Did you believe him?
I don't know. don't. I not really, to be honest.
He
But I mean,
wasn't the best.
I'm not
He
going to
wasn't
call
the
him a
most
liar,
reliable.
but I don't know.
All right, you ready? Here we go. What details did he give you? Like, did he give you detail? How?
Well,
Where was
he's
the guard?
dead.
Where was the
He
guard
killed himself
standing?
afterwards. There was no guards.
No guard.
No guards at all. He was in a small room with no guards.
That was locked or not locked? He was locked in a small
Unlocked.
room.
He was in a visitor center that was locked. And in the visitor center was a small room that was unlocked.
Because that happens a lot.
I mean, I don't know, but I'm not going to say he's
That
not
happens
telling the truth, but
if he's
I have my
talking
doubts.
about the microwave, that's that's an unlocked door in the visitor center. Okay.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. So I'm gonna go lying.
Okay.
Sorry, guy.
But
I'll
then we
say
did
it now.
Jim Beatty. He was an English professor who was asked to write the story of Pee Wee Gaskins.
Okay.
And he went and visited him, and he was so like Josh Moss was very manipulative, and he lied and he conned and very just cold in a way. And then Jim Beatty was the exact opposite. He's an English professor, like a pastor, very kind, and he believed Pee Wee Gaskins' bullshit. He was like, Pee Wee Gaskins is like, I'm innocent. The only people I killed, it was business. It was like a mafia hit. I'm not a sexual predator. Something he would later say.
And did he believe him because he was so nice?
Yes, until
the nicest guy you've ever met.
Pee Wee Gaskins manipulated him into mailing him. He manipulated him into mailing him bomb parts that he didn't know what he was mailing him. And fucking he used them to blow a guy's head off on death row.
Conversation I had. This is the conversation I have at every damn party. I'm like, can you believe how nice, how handsome Ted Bundy was? I mean, could he have? And I'm like, and I've had conversation. I mean, here's something. Sam would get pissed at me. And he'd like send my phone number to one of his fans.
That's fucked up.
It's funny. I know. He was funny, right? Like,
that's
funny.
Fucked up.
How fucked up is that? So I get a call and I can't block people's numbers, right? Because I'm a crime journalist. Yeah. Who am I gonna block?
Right.
I just had to get rid of a story I was doing because the person I was talking to got just like crossed my boundaries, so far that I was just like, you know why I'm not working on this story anymore? It's not even because, may I swear on your thing?
Oh, yeah.
It's not because you're a fucking scumbag. It's because you're so stupid you just pissed off a journalist. And you're not worth my time. It's like somebody like I was taking very seriously, and there's an important lawyer taking very seriously, and it's an important case, who started calling me at 2 a.m. from what fucking phone, please? Like asked me what I was wearing, and I was like, how fucking dumb are you? You shithead. I mean, I had a very complicated relationship with Sam where he, like I said, he was funny. I'm like, you guy are an idiot. Like Sam was so offensive and like disturbing to my dreams and my family and everyone else, even to this day. But he had this whole thing. He said, are you coming to visit me at Rick's Cafe this weekend? Rick's Cafe from Casablanca. Right. Because he imagined himself in the movies. He loved the movie where Humphrey Bogart strangles Barbara Stanwyck.
Yeah. I remember you saying that in the book.
Wives of, I might be mixing it up, but, he loves that movie and he saw himself as this heroic, and stoic and sort of Hemingway-esque kind of Bogart character. And he would say, are you coming to visit me at Rick's Cafe? I hired a violinist,
Play it again, Sam.
He was funny. And, people I talked to, and his fans who he gave my number to and like started texting me like, can you even believe how, like, he's just the nicest person you've ever met. If you, and also, and often they were, like, oh, we're, writing to save him. And I was like, I don't know if you've talked to Sam yet, but he's already saved. He was forgiven every time he murdered someone because he asked for forgiveness. And if you ask for forgiveness, then you are like St. Paul on the road to Damascus. You will find forgiveness from Jesus between the stirrup and the ground when you fall off your horse. So all he had to do is ask. He wasn't concerned about being saved. As far as he was concerned, he was saved.
Jeez.
Yeah.
And he also thought murder was no worse than stealing candy
Murder
bar.
is no worse than stealing a cookie from the cookie jar. That's the Bible. And, I said, well, even my little bit of religious school, actually, I went to a lot of religious school. I think there's a hierarchy, even in the Bible. Like, I think kind of goes like, 1, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. Like, 1 tried to do 2. Like, he could not do the second commandment. And this is a guy who's waving around the Bible like it justifies him murdering people. And I didn't know the second commandment. I mean, he was I don't even think he believed it. He's a con artist.
Yeah.
Right.
I have the 4 books that were in his cell because he left me all his earthly possessions.
Yeah, I wanted to
Want to know what
touch
they
on
were?
that. Yes,
Ready?
please.
Webster's Dictionary. Okay. Which takes on significance when you know that he would write things to me and say, how do you spell this? It's like, are you desperate or like, desolate? Or are you this? And I would just be like, oh, this is my favorite one. He called me Angel, but he spelled it Angle. Yeah, he said Jillian is always an angle.
Well,
And then one of the 4 books, one of the 4 books in his cell, a dictionary. So a dictionary, the Bible, a little homemade photo album of his fans, me, some pictures from magazines of Rihanna, Condoleezza Rice, who he was obsessed with. Like, I mean, I don't know. Like I said, he was kind of funny, but also like he was serious about that. But what?
Weird.
Okay, that and Down These Mean Streets by Perry Thomas, which is an excellent memoir written by a gangster who was in prison in the 50s.
I know that one.
It's great. I taught it in my, how to write from the edge kind of workshops and classes. Yeah, Perry Thomas, Down These Mean Streets. But, he's pretending he doesn't know how to spell words. And one of 4 books he has is a dictionary.
I thought you were going to say how to win friends and influence people.
He probably read the dictionary more than he read the Bible. There were no marks in it. There were no, most people will mark a Bible.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So, people will I'm like, he did these things though. Like, here are the things he did. Here's what you're perceiving. Like, have you ever been to a magic show? Have you ever watched someone play 3-card Monty? I called him in my head. One of his nicknames was 3-card Monty. Right? Like, are you under the impression that anyone's actually doing magic when you're watching those shows? But you still can't catch the trick, right?
Right.
But you went to a magic show. So you're not seeing somebody make somebody float in the air for
It's an
real.
illusion. Yeah.
Right. Illusion. You bought the illusion, so you're getting one. Here's the thing is these people didn't buy the illusion. They're walking into what they think is a conversation with just another human, just like them. Right? And it's not true.
He was the old man perv, the snake.
Perv grandpa.
The snake.
3-card Monty. And Snake Monster.
Yeah.
Oof.
I mean,
Perv grandpa.
Perv grandpa was actually, do you know Tehu Cole? The writer Tehu Cole is unbelievably, I just wrote the memoir, just wrote the novel Trimmer. He wrote the novel Open City, which I loved. Well, so this is the first, talk about literary, talk about my New Yorker days being over. my New Yorker dreams being crushed into the ground. Um, but he's a very New Yorker writer. So
Mhm.
I was floored reading his new novel. And there's a professor in this novel, and his student presents a piece on Samuel Little. And the professor's shock at the story, at the perpetual like injustices that happened across the country because Samuel Little picked victims who were consistently ignored by the system.
Mhm.
I mean,
Right.
the criminalist Stephen Eggers called them the less dead. This
Right.
population of victims that is somehow less dead than,
Mhm.
say, if you're a pretty girl and you disappear on spring break in Key West, then you are the most dead.
Mm.
Or Miami, I don't know. Key West it might not be the
Or
place.
Instagram influencer, like what's her name? Gabby.
That's not, might not be the place these days. Daytona Beach, whatever. You're the most dead.
Mhm.
And if you are, an addict, a struggling woman, a prostitute, a woman of color, and you live in South LA, then you are the least dead. I mean, cops at the time, some would call in homicides of marginalized and vulnerable victims as 187 a homicide, say on 5th and Main, and it's an NHI, no
No
humans
human
involved.
involved. I thought that was just
Or it's
awful when I
or it's
read it
a
in your
no
book.
one. They also said it's a no one.
We've
Like
covered a lot of LGBTQ stuff, like Freeway Killers, Randy Kraft, and it was just the same way. If it was a gay man, they didn't, and then those
well, and you know what
killers
that
were able to stack up huge amounts of victims because no one would investigate it.
I thank you so much for mentioning that. And it's almost like I've stopped fighting to mention it because especially when you talk on TV, um, it's it's a very new experience. The way that they edit you, they just cut off the whole end of the sentence. So if I say women and transgender victims, like the and transgender victims will just get cut off because I'm fighting for these vulnerable women. Well, yes, I am. And there were transgender victims of SAMs, and they're particularly hard to solve. They were often misgendered, and were parts of communities that at the time, 1974, Marianne, one of my more heartbreaking victims, it was illegal to be transgender in Miami.
Right.
Who's going to show up and say my roommate's missing?
Right.
Right? My transgender roommate's missing.
Such a needless tragedy, like you said, Matt, that just, I mean, it sounds it sounds so trite to say it because like obviously this is the way it goes, but if they're not caught early, then they're just allowed. It's like you're not just having this great injustice by not by not solving for that person in the moment. You're not giving the LGBTQ or the black woman the justice in the moment, but then everyone that comes after them, it's just such a crazy ripple effect that you would think it would be common sense to try to take it all the way and then solve whatever happened. Because I mean, even if you're a complete asshole and you want to be like, well, I don't care about this transgender victim. Well, maybe the next time it will be somebody you care about. I mean, there's such a sense of like departmental politics that people who are, and limited funds and also like maybe, like there were two amazing patrol cops in San Diego, who caught him in the act and who gave in great testimony, and are haunted to this day and did save the victim. Like only ones people had caught him in the act before and didn't even look in the car. So me and the old lady are in a fight. Just leave us alone. And the woman was already dead in the car. Yeah, my God.
Just drove away. And these cops, Wayne Spees was one of them, in San Diego, like they went and looked in the car and their testimony was incredible. So like I can't make a blanket generalization, but yes, it's like there are people who's like are wearing an invisibility cloak. And I think that it's very important to and I mean invisible to, and I don't mean Sam. I mean his victims, like, they're invisible to us
Yeah.
because they're not worth our thought. They're not worth our time. It's when Sam escaped justice so many times, twice he was tried by a jury of his peers. I mean, many times he just wasn't indicted. I mean, like it's not TV, everyone. You don't like go to trial every single time you get arrested, right? Like that happens less often than you might think. Sam even was tried by a jury twice, and they let him off. Lack of evidence,
The San Diego one was crazy because he was in the same exact spot where a woman had been found murdered. And he's there and he's strangling a woman caught literally red-handed. He's got blood and phlegm on him from her coughing up on him. And he's somehow acquitted. You're like,
and a second victim he left for dead, who didn't die. And he just said that, never did it to me. He said, never let it to anyone alive after that. He served 18 months for that. He pled down to kidnapping and, oh no, this was another one. There was a charge of ravishment that he pled to. I was like, what is ravishment?
It's like mayhem.
Like, that's a thing anywhere that you can be even charged with? It sounds like a horrible word from a romance novel. Like,
yeah,
he was charged with ravishment. I mean, she sounds like was she lucky? I mean,
right.
I was just like,
it's like a title to a book you see in a drugstore.
Kidnapping and assault, and he, and when it was attempted murder, and he'd been tried for murder already. But here we go. Kidnapping and assault, got 18 months, got out, killed two women in one night. Same night, drove straight to LA to be with his old girlfriend and killed two women in the same night.
Yeah, and then once the grand jury refused to indict as well on a different case.
It was, grand jury failed to indict. Yes, it was a grand jury and then two juries of his peers, and one in Alachua, Florida, and one in San Diego.
And those are public defenders, huh?
Yes.
I mean, I hate to say this, but you got to give those public defenders some credit. That's insane. How the fuck did they get him off? It's nuts.
You know what? Because, I mean, there's actually one who's an interesting lawyer, and there is this note, this mysterious note that was in his file that the LAPD found that no one knows who wrote it or who left it, but there's a note. I can confirm that. I heard that from reputable sources who have actually seen the note with their eyeballs. And that note was from one of Sam's public defenders saying, I suspect this man killed many more people.
Wow.
Yeah. Like someone please get on this. But I don't think but they weren't like Clarence Darrow, and they weren't like any kind of famous. It didn't, I mean, they didn't even let the victims testify in Pascagoula. The two women that he had assaulted in Pascagoula, who were coming to testify to having tried to kill them after they found a white victim that he had succeeded. These two women showed up. They walked to the courthouse. They didn't have a car. Two Black prostitutes who lived in an incredibly segregated society. It was 81 or 82. Hilda Nelson was pregnant. She walked into the courthouse, saw Sam Little, and urinated on herself. They made her clean it up and had them walk home and didn't even take their testimony. And that's when he was acquitted, or that's when he was not indicted by a grand jury. Yeah. His other victims, to establish any kind of pattern evidence, they didn't even hear their testimony. So I could tell you 1,000 infuriating stories like that. My real blessing was that I got to talk to Hilda. I get to know what her life was like. and what created that situation. I get to hear about what her life's like now. I mean, she's passed on, but the kind of decisions she made after that attack, the way that the women in that community protected each other, because no one was protecting them. That's how she wasn't killed. Her best friend, Dolores, who had passed, didn't get a chance to meet her. The women in the neighborhood had a deal with each other, right? It's called Carver Village. It was famous for miles around. You get anything you wanted in Carver Village. Drugs, girls, guns, everything was juke joints and bordellos. Quite fascinating. Now it's nothing. They have raised the whole place to the ground. It's like one senior citizen center. And like a couple of footprints of old buildings. The King William's Hotel, where, one of his victims was picked up. He picked up one of his victims there. But, I got to meet these women who gave me this incredibly rich, picture of both San Diego. That was Lori Barros and Pascagoula, Mississippi, and worlds I never would have seen. And the same thing with Sam's family in Lorain, Ohio, which is not far from where my husband grew up, and is suffering the same kind of, Midwestern turmoil, the death of industry, the steel industry, we're expressing, a lot of the experiences that I know from members of my husband's family after, working in factories for years. All of a sudden, you can't support family working at a factory, and the world of really dedicated cops and FBI agents and Texas Rangers. I didn't even know that was still a thing.
He's your buddy, huh?
Neither did we.
People thought I was like, they're like, you're going to Texas again to see that Texas. They thought I was like having an affair with a baseball player. I was like, thank you, first of all, but no, I'm going to see a cop. Like these fascinating worlds, and people say, I talk to Sam every day of my life, and that I could have lived without, truly.
Oh my God.
But he was insistent on it. And frankly, I had contracts and I needed content and the days, and he wasn't living forever. Mm-hmm. And there were victims still undiscovered. And I was racing against all those clocks. Mm-hmm. And I can't remember what my point was. I've never been like that before. That I go, what was I saying? I think until this story, I just said every once in a while, I'm like, I did that? Oh my God, wait, what was I talking about?
It's wild. It's so wild.
It does. It throws me off sometimes. And also, there isn't a day I don't shed a tear for this still. So, it's I can be very straightforward, and I have the strongest, and not the strongest. I've met people who are stronger, but I have a very strong stomach. I can sometimes appear glib. Some of that is just Jersey, and some of that is, I'm a survivor. I'm an abuse survivor. And just, I was born a fighter. So, you probably won't get a tear out of me right now, but you'll definitely get a tear out of me. This story gets a tear out of me every day still.
You made me cry.
So, yeah, absolutely.
Well, you're not alone. I always think, people ask me, how do you write about stuff that's this hard, that's this disturbing, or how do you write about your family, and things like that. And it's, and not get so upset or not get so traumatized, not cry. And, I guess I think that's what I was talking about. There you go. Trauma. Mm-hmm. That's what I was talking about. And I'm like, you don't. It's not therapy. Right. Writing. And if I'm not willing to to leave some tears on the page, why would I expect my reader to? And if I can't make you care, then, how can I get you interested in like my political fire if I can't get your heart? So I want it all. I want your brain. I want your heart. I want you to buy my book on my website right now, JillianLauren.com. You have amazing deals.
Well, I think on that note, I mean, we absolutely support that statement that we want all our listeners to buy your book.
Behold the Monster, Confronting America's Most Prolific Serial Killer. Buy the book. It's amazing, I can tell you.
It truly is.
And Confronting a Serial Killer, the documentary, is streaming now. Please do buy the book and check out. I'm going to be doing a lot more on TikTok about, I know you talk about self-defense, I'm talking a lot about serial killers, all the new developments we're having, and, just different ways to sort of improve our awareness, without our, hypervigilance and fear sort of backing us into a corner.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's your TikTok handle? Is it? What's your TikTok?
Jillian Lauren author, and it's Jillian Lauren on Instagram.
All right.
Oh, and we have my husband, Scott Schreiner from Weezer's, doing a tour this summer. That's pretty incredible with Smashing Pumpkins and Flaming Lips, and we are giving away tickets. So.
Very exciting.
Yes, so I know. It's people really, as heartbreaking as the stories are, to watch people get behind the book now is very heartening to me. And so I really thank everyone who has.
Ladies and gentlemen, the amazing Jillian Lauren, thank you so much for being on the show. We will put links to her website, her Instagram, and her TikTok in the show notes. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening. We will catch you next week.